Hey Lisa,
Hey, Steve.
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. We're here for another conversation this week, but a
Another
totally new topic.
another casual conversation.
Yeah. So this week, I think we're going to talk about something that I feel is probably one of the most important things, or at least if I look back in my history, one of the most important topics for me, which is anxiety and the
Hmm.
sense of overwhelm.
Yeah, I certainly have had my fair share of that in my life too. So we'll
I think
see.
everyone has.
Yeah. Well, and even as we just look at the last 2 years with the pandemic, I think most of what I've read has, and I don't know the stats offhand, but that anxiety levels have increased, right? And anxiety disorders have increased, and overwhelm has increased for all sorts of different factors. But even pre-pandemic, I certainly had those senses of overwhelm and anxiety, and just that. But like I like to describe it as like a bubbling. It feels like there's bubbling and it's about to overflow.
Yeah, it's like a bodily thing, isn't it? You can sense it coming up and taking control almost. Yeah, I think a lot of people, even before COVID and everything else, have had experience of anxiety. But like you say, I think the last couple of years have tested everyone's um, sense of what true anxiety is. And I know we will have experienced it probably differently. Maybe we can talk about that actually. But I don't know. Even if we go back pre-COVID, before the last few years, I mean, what's your experience generally with anxiety, or how did it show up for you?
Yeah. As I look back, I can remember anxiety or that feeling of overwhelm, um, at different periods in my life. If I think of, pre-kids, pre-marriage, even at school and at work, I would have that sense of anxiety, right? That sense that things are going too quickly, that I've lost control, that I'm not sure what's coming next, right? And it kind of feels for me, and to this day, this is how it comes up for me. I get just tension on my shoulders and my neck. I hold it there. And then I just get that feeling. My heart rate is starting to beat faster. And there's this feeling like I'm racing against something. I'm not sure what, but I'm just like racing. And what I don't think I knew before that I realize now is the speed of my thoughts, right? That I'm so engaged, like my center of awareness in anxiety is all here.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because I think that's where it lives. Honestly, when I think about anxiety in my own life and from what I've heard from other people, it's all in the head. You start with a physical feeling, but then when you actually boil it down, it's just constant racing thoughts, isn't it? It's like the mind just taking complete control of you, setting you one thought after the next. Normally, a thought of doom or some impending danger or fear or something like that, and it just compounds and compounds until it just creates that complete overwhelm. And it can feel like a bit of a pit, can't it? Like, how do I get out of this when you're trapped in the middle of it? um, but luckily, well, at least in my own experience, it does end eventually, right? It's rare to have it, and I hope it's not ongoing for anyone out there. But I know in my life it typically does end, and there's a few ways to do that. So I'm interested actually if you've got any ways that you can actually cut it on the head, or you found to sort of get out of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna share like one of the main ways that I experienced like anxiousness or anxiety, overwhelm, was post kids, and it tended to be, and I'll share this, and then I'll share some of the things that have helped me, but was morning rush. The morning rush was always like, I knew was going to be anxiety evoking, right? And what I realized was that I was so engaged with this thought, oh no, we're going to be late. Oh no, we're going to be late. And so I was fighting against this belief like, I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late. Oh no, here we go again. We're going to be late. And so that kind of had that feeling come up. And then I was just looking for evidence around me that that was going to be true. Right. And the more I found evidence, right, like a small kid is looking for their boots, or they're not doing what they should be, as kids, do, not do what they're supposed to do often. It just kept on getting worse and worse and worse. So I think the first thing that kind of helped me, and there's probably a bunch of strategies that I use now that have really helped me, but the first one was just that insight. The insight that what I was fighting against was a thought in my head, especially in that particular circumstance, that I was fighting against, I'm going to be late. And then my brain was just looking for evidence that, in fact, that was what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Rather than loosening up on that, number one, kind of loosening on the we're going to be late. Number two, knowing that it was all in my head, just having the insight, it's actually just a reaction to a thought that I was having. That in itself kind of freed me to know that it wasn't really what was happening in the moment, but what was happening in the moment here. It wasn't out here, it was in here.
That's the key point, isn't it? That is the key point. I think that's what sums it up in a way for me, is when I think about anxiety, is that it's typically a future-facing fear, or sometimes even the past, something that's triggering a bodily response, some kind of trauma. It's never really, or very rarely, in the present moment, because often in the present moment, there is no major fire. Like you say, it's the thought in the head of the impending fire. And often what the thing you're anxious about is never actually as bad. Even if it materializes, it's rarely as bad as how your mind and body make it out to be. Because in that moment, when we're having that kind of overwhelm attack, it's quite hard to find the solution in that moment. But actually, in reality, when we're faced with some kind of problem or drama, we always know how to deal with it, because you give it that absolute alert presence in the moment, and you've got all the resources to resolve it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's interesting that we're actually battling with this rather than the actual real life scenario that's presenting itself.
Yeah. So how do you do that? How do you bring yourself to the moment? Like, let's say you're having an anxious moment, or you notice that you're anxious. How is it that you employ that kind of strategy to help you?
I think the number one thing is probably number one thing is noticing it. So as soon as I'm having it, which is thankfully rare these days compared with like a few years back, but when I know it's happening, it's like, right, name it. I'm having a bit of an anxiety attack. That's what it is. And typically I'll say my mind is overthinking, or my mind is racing. I take it away from me, or I am having a situation. It's the mind. Because once you start labeling it the mind, over time, eventually you start to believe it. It's not really me, or it's not really what's real. It's this thing called the mind that we're all battling against. It's like a disease, isn't it? So yeah, that's the first thing. I think just knowing that, saying that, it slightly detaches from it. Next thing, if I'm overwhelmed or feel a sense of there's just so much going on, because I think there's anxiety, and then I think there's this sense of overwhelm where there's just too many things in my mind or going on, I will actually write them down. It's something I've done for quite a while, and it really helps. If I feel like I'm anxious but I don't quite know why, or there's loads of different things, I'll just literally put them on paper, write them all down. So what could be causing this? And you'll end up with 5 or 6 things sometimes. And actually, when you look at them together, they do feel a bit like overwhelming, but actually seeing them on paper, it takes them out of your mind, and it just loosens some of the pressure. And then next thing is, once I see them down, I say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 key ones here? What are the most important things? Circle them, and then take an action related to them. So each one, go through it and say, what's one thing I can do about that? One thing I can do about that? One thing I can do about that? All of a sudden, you get a sense of taking charge, rather than being a bit of a victim to the anxiety. All of a sudden, you can actually take charge of the situation and feel like you've got a sense of control again, like you're holding the reins, rather than just being taken down the river, to the impending doom at the end, which is never really there in reality, or very rarely there in reality.
Yeah.
So they're probably the key things I would say that I do when I'm in that situation.
I have that same experience of writing down things, and just even before I do anything to the list of things, I already feel better. Like just the mere practice of writing it down. I did it this morning actually, because we have so much going on right now. And just the mere fact I got into my office and I just wrote down what are some of the things that need to happen. And I was holding it all in my head and it was making me anxious. And then I wrote it all down, and just that little simple step helped me to go, oh yeah, this is doable. I instantly had the thought, yeah, this is doable. We can do this.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's just these small things can make such a difference, but I think it's just feeling like less trapped when it's in your head, which we've said numerous times, it is all up here. It's when you get it out of your head, you put it on paper, you just instantly feel less trapped, and there's like a way out. In the same way as I'd also say, if it's really bad, just speak to somebody, call a friend, call a family member, and just have a conversation, even if it's not about the anxiety. If you feel comfortable, great, speak about it. But if not, just call someone. It makes such a big difference. Again, it just sucks you out of your head, and allows you to focus on something else. Because once you're pulled out of that moment, all of a sudden you can just see a bit of clarity again.
Yeah. Were there any particular like instances, like situations that you are more prone to be anxious about in your past or even now?
Yeah, for me in the past, it was always work. It was always work. There was numerous times, particularly when starting new jobs, even though I had the experience for the job, where those first few days or weeks, sometimes even months, particularly when I was younger, I'd be overcome with anxiety attacks. Probably what am I doing here? Am I good enough for this? It's going to be hard, that I'm going to be shown up, that type of thing. And it was really debilitating in the early days. I don't know if I ever talked about it with many people, but it really was. And I remember one time just having to leave the office, and I was walking down the street and I was thinking, I need to go to the pharmacy. I need to get some pills or something. Like I'm literally having a major attack. It's quite intense, but it was typically triggered by that. And I think, but then I think the root cause behind all that is probably and I think it's probably the case of everyone, when you have those bad attacks, I think it always points to something in the past. I think like these situations, whether it's work, relationships, they sort of remind you of something possibly in the past, even if it's not consciously, it can be unconsciously in your body. Where for me, the fear, I guess, was around like, oh, I'm not going to be good enough here in this job, or I'm going to get found out for being, for making mistakes. And I think probably subconsciously somewhere there's a trigger back to the past around where I might have had one bad situation or a few bad situations of making mistakes and it went wrong. And it's just, I think your body carries this kind of stuff with you.
Yeah.
And the more I've read and the more I've done coaching and other things, I think I'm getting more familiar with that now, and I'm starting to understand it more. And just understanding it actually makes it easier to deal with it when it comes up.
Yeah, it's such a common thing I know with my clients, where there's that inner critic, and certainly, of course, we all have an inner critic, right? I know in the past for me, I would get anxious when I had to do public speaking, and I did a lot of presentations when I was younger in my corporate days, and I would get like really nervous about it and anxious about it, and I could feel all of the kind of body sensations around it. And it was, it was similar in terms of an inner critic kind of saying like, how this is not going to go well. This is not, but I know that just realizing that it is something that from the past, that it's kind of a mental or pattern, right? Like it's a mind pattern that is just there. And you said earlier, it's not you. And it's not. It's like this pattern, this thought pattern that's just in your mind. And because it's played a few times, it's just easily played again and again. But it's not truly who we are.
Well, I think you've hit on like the absolute key point there, because I think I think there's lots of ways to sort of tackle anxiety in the moment, like we talked about, which is writing it down or talking to somebody, naming it for what it is, which is the mind chatter. Even breathing, I don't think we talked about that, but just breathing and focusing on your breath, and or focusing on one spot or a tree, and just it can take you out of it. But I think the longer term, for me anyway, what I've learned about myself, the longer term, I guess, remedy is really spending some time focusing and working out like who you are, like who are you really with when you take away the mind. And now we're probably getting to that kind of spiritual realm a little bit, but essentially, even if you just boil it down to knowing that you're not your thoughts, and starting there, like, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not these anxious thoughts, I'm not the role that I might play in my life. That's part of that is you, obviously, but I guess deeper than that is, I guess, your true self, which is you without all the role or the negative thoughts, just the kind of, I guess, again, the sort of more spiritual side of you. That is more where I think increasingly over time, people are starting to realize that if they focus more there, they can actually have a more fulfilled experience of life and less anxiety. And you can even see it in, some of the, I guess, some of the hobbies now with mindfulness, yoga, meditation. All of these things are there to bring people a bit closer to sort of who they are, the deeper self.
Yeah, it's a connection inward, like it's an inner, here are the best words I have to describe it, because it is a hard thing to describe, I find. But it's like an inward orientation and connection, and sits underneath these patterned thought processes that develop over time and start when we're young. And it's underneath that. And it's kind of coming back to that connection that allows us to, I use this analogy a lot with my clients. It's the difference between swimming in the water versus sitting on the dock watching the waves.
Yeah.
It
No, I get that.
Don't, and it's not mine. I've seen it, read it, and but it really rang true to me when I saw it, which is, it's the waves are going to do what the waves are going to do, because that's just what they're programmed to do. And we can there's certain things we can do to wire our brain differently, or help to kind of adjust what's naturally occurring. But ultimately, we can't live an anxiety-free life. It just isn't reality. But we can get to a place where we can actually get ourselves on the dock to watch the waves, rather than, trying to fight the waves in the water.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of, again, I quoted Eckhart Tolle last time. I'll do it again because it's a favorite author, one of the favorite authors of mine. But he often talks about watching, being the observer of your thoughts. So not kind of denying the thought or shutting down the thought, but just kind of observing it, which is a similar thing to what I think you're saying. It's like, yeah, the turmoil might be there, or the situation will be there, but if you just watch yourself with no judgment and listen to how you're reacting to it, or observing your sense of overwhelm, but just taking a slight step back from it. Sounds crazy at first, and people might be thinking, what are you talking about? But the more you do it, the more you start to see there is actually a slight separation from the me that's just having this experience, and then the me that's watching me having the experience. All of a sudden, there's just that sense of separation and a bit of space and a bit of relief in the knowledge that, okay, that isn't actually completely me there. It's just my conditioned reaction and responses to this situation. And when you can see that, all of a sudden you can see there's possibly a route to changing that reaction, and it happens over time. But it's amazing when you can actually start putting that into practice.
Yeah, I found it hard to see that to begin with, and then, as you said, it did become easier with time. And I find for me, what works is, it tends to be like getting like actually body sensation. Like actually, when I notice that I'm there, if I'm able to kind of, rub my hands together and feel the warmth between my hands, or, even touch my ear. But now every time I touch my ear, people will think I feel anxious. There's things that you can do even when you're with someone, and then really put your attention to the sensation of your finger rubbing against your ear, it takes your mind out of survival mode and, your sympathetic nervous system, and it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which just allows you to bring your awareness to body sensations. It calms everything down. All right. So I know that has been a huge help for me as well. Just being able to constantly redirect myself to body sensation and interrupt that pattern of whatever thought process is going on.
Yeah, no, I've taken a course actually on kind of that inner critic or that inner voice, and that was one of the key tips that I remembered from it that actually did work, is to just create some kind of slightly different sensation. Either rub your fingers together gently, or it doesn't have to be a physical sensation. It can even be something like a sound, focusing on one sound just for literally a minute. Just focus on only one sound for a minute, and just get really still. It's a similar to doing like a really, really quick meditation. And again, all it's doing is it's making space between the thoughts and just bringing you back to a sense of alignment.
Yeah, and interrupting that automatic response to something, right? Because I had an automatic response to the mornings with my kids, right? There was just an automatic thought process. It was morning. Oh my gosh, we're going to be late. I'm like looking at the clock every 3 seconds. And so, just being able to really bring my attention to that moment interrupted that thought process for me, so that I didn't get engaged in the thought. I didn't identify with I didn't believe all of the things that were going on in my head. I didn't have to believe anything. All I had to do is kind of feel in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that I think, even in this time we've been speaking, there's so many different ways, and I think everybody's different. So everybody has to try different things and just see what works for them. Because there's lots of ways to get, again, to kind of come out of the mind and start to take back charge, but it's just whichever one works best for you. And I think everyone's got their own, their own preferred method, I guess.
Yeah. Are there any other tips or tools that you would share as someone kind of is struggling with overwhelm or anxious feelings?
Share. I think I would come back to trying to, I guess, this becomes into the self-development. Maybe this is all about just focusing on self-development, but I would say don't underestimate building yourself up. And what I mean by that is don't underestimate the impact of coaching, personal development, understanding yourself over trying to solve an external situation. Because one of the, I guess, golden rules of coaching is around don't coach the problem, coach the person. And that's really true. And I know it in my own experience and from coaching people as well, is you can think this problem, this external problem or situation is the thing, that's the issue, that's the thing that's causing me to overwhelm. But I would say 9 times out of 10, it's not that. It's how you are responding to the problem, how your conditioned mind, your experiences, your sense of value of yourself is causing a lot of the anxiety. You might not feel that way, at the time, but this is just what I know in hindsight, because the more you coach yourself or get coaching or development or just study, read books, the more you get a sense of a stronger sense of self and self-confidence, the easier it is to deal then with these things that aren't ideal on the outside, and the easier it is to pull yourself out of it. At least that's what I've seen. I don't know if that resonates with you or not, but
it does. I'm thinking back, both my parents have had cancer, and I've helped them through that process. My mom had cancer many years ago. I was in my 20s. I didn't have all of these tools at my disposal. But my dad had cancer about 10 years ago. And so I had started down this journey, and I had read Eckhart Tolle, and I had some of these tools at my disposal. And I remember, feeling anxious about what's going to happen, right? Like feeling overwhelmed with the possibility of losing my dad, who has been, one of the most important people in my life. And I, call him my hero. And And I thought, my goodness, like if I can use some of this here, then, and everything from realizing that the external was just the external, and that any thought that I was having around, me trying to convince myself everything's going to be okay, or me ruminating around, oh my gosh, what am I going to do if, that they were just thoughts, right? And that I just kind of was able to detach myself from just the natural thing that the mind does, which is to try to solve things that are unsolvable, really, because to really get clear on how I wanted to show up for my dad in that moment, right? To really go like, what's my purpose here? Like, how do I want to show up? What are some of the things that I want to look back on how I dealt with it, not how I dealt with this, but what my purpose was in this journey he was walking, and that I wanted to walk beside him. So getting really clear on how I wanted to be in that moment. And then there was almost an element of reframing, right? Like, yes, I can see this as, oh my gosh, my dad is going through cancer and I might lose him. And I knew that would be true. That could be true, right? But to say, I get to actually spend time with him at every radiation appointment because I went with him. I was clear that I wanted to go with him, and I get to listen to his stories a little more attentively, right? Because I wasn't sure whether or not it would be the last time he shared that story, right? So there was an element of gratitude, but there was like a reframing that I think I consciously did around, yes, the situation sucks. Yes, I don't have any idea how things are going to work out, but there are things that I can focus my attention on that allow me to be very clear on how I want to show up and how I want to be in this scenario. And that really helped me to reduce my anxiety. Not to say that those thoughts didn't come up, because they did. Not to say that I didn't have anxious moments. I did, but it was kind of like the place that I would return to, right? What's true right now. And then I would just go from there.
Yeah. It sounds like one of the key things within all of that is that acceptance. It's like you were able to, once you fully accepted the situation as it was, even though it sucks in many ways, and many other situations that we go through, they suck. But it's like once you stop resisting, you fully accepted it, and then started looking at what can I create from this situation.
I so love that you just said that, Steve, because it's true. It's until I accepted that that's just how it was, like that's what the reality was right now. My dad had cancer and he needed treatment, right? And once I was able to just accept, embrace, whatever, like just that is what it is, right? Byron Katie always says that, right? It is what it is. So you can fight it, but if it is what it is, there's not much you can do about it, right?
Yeah, or you're just burning more energy, right, on the fight, and that's the I think the challenge for a lot of people. There's so much resistance to whatever's happening, whether you've missed the flight, or you're stuck in a line, or you're stuck in traffic. Half the anxiety, comes from, oh, I'm going to be late or whatever, but also it's just the kind of resistance to this shouldn't be happening, or I should have left earlier, or I should have. It's just that constant resistance that causes a lot more of the pain. And if you can train yourself over time to start to just accept things as they are, really truly accept it, not just say it, but actually fully accept it and surrender to it, all of a sudden you get to create something new, which is what you were saying. Even though it's a really difficult situation, what you just explained to your dad, it also sounded in there's opportunities to create some really nice memories and experiences.
Yeah. And I don't know that I would have I don't know that I would have held those moments the way I did, because I can remember moments like this when I think back of sitting at the hospital with him waiting for his appointment. I remember hearing the way he shared certain stories, and really maybe like there was nothing that was going to disrupt or interrupt us, right? So, and I don't know that I would have been able to hold that had I not been able to just accept the situation and then be able to create something from it, which was, listen, I'm going to cherish these moments. That's what I want to do. That's actually what I want to do. Which makes sense because our brain just doesn't work when we're stressed, right? It's just the part of the brain that thinks is not accessible based on just the chemicals that are running through your veins.
Yeah, I'm wondering how, if somebody was listening to us talking it, I wonder how you would explain how you get to that point, because what you're saying there, it takes a lot of work to kind of to get to the point from being really resistant to things that are happening in life versus seeing the ways to create out of the anxiety almost. And I just wonder how could we articulate how to actually shift if it seems so alien. And I don't know the answer, by the way. I'm asking myself as I'm saying it. But,
I almost want to say something even before we go there, which is that it's a process and not a destination. I have to remind myself of this often, and my clients. There is no perfect point where you just got it and now you're just, unless you're like an Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie and you have this enlightened. I certainly haven't experienced that.
Not yet. One day though, you never know.
No. But so it's a process, right? It's not, there's nowhere to hurry to get to, right? There's no need for urgency. Like I need to get there, because that in itself tends to create resistance. I have found in my own experience and with clients. So that was the first thing that popped into my mind as you shared.
No, it's a good point. It is a good point, because like you say, all of a sudden it creates a new anxiety around, am I ever going to be able to completely get rid of anxiety? It's just a vicious circle, right?
Yeah, like this anxiety comes and then we're like, oh my gosh, we're here again. And oh no. And it just starts building rather than where we almost started, where you said, anxiety kind of comes and goes. Yeah. It's actually true irrespective of what we do about it. We could do nothing about it and it'll come and it'll go.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I mean, I have anxiety often. I think the difference is that it's the level of it. It's the level of it. It's not, and the way and the choice to respond. But yeah, it's never going to eliminate itself. It's especially while we're all human beings.
But how do we put this into practice? That's a great question. And I know for me, I just chose to practice bringing my awareness to the present moment. And I think because I know both you and I are, big fans of Eckhart Tolle, what he kind of speaks to around just bringing yourself to, there's nothing wrong right now.
Yeah.
And I started to practice that over and over. That's where I started. And then there's other things, but where did you start?
I think it was the same place, to be honest with you. I remember the first time I read the book, the Eckhart Tolle book, The Power of Now. I think it was the first one. And my friend gave it to me, and she knew I was a bit stressed, and she handed this book to me and she said, "This book's going to change your life. I'm just letting you know." And I was thinking, okay, whatever. And I have to say, it probably did. It was the catalyst, I think, for reading a lot of other stuff, including his other books. And I would say the same as what you've just said. The first thing to do is to get really present. And you could say it's a bit cliche because a lot of people talk about presence now and the present moment, but it's because it's true. If you can train yourself to bring your attention to the present moment, this exact moment, and try and calm the mind, which is what mindfulness and meditation and all that other stuff does, it is a really good start for everything else. It's a really good start, even if it feels like it's not doing anything. And if it's not doing anything, or you're starting to get mad with yourself, know that that's just the thoughts again taking over. Yeah. It's just repeating itself. So again, if you fail the first time or the second time or the 10th time, I would still say keep trying with that. Keep trying to get present. What's going on right now?
Yeah.
Listen to your breath. Calm down. Just calm down. Breathe. Calm down. Just get present. Get present. Eventually, it becomes a habit, and I would say that's the door opening to finding a consistent way to deal with those moments when they come.
I felt I felt like I was calming down just as you were.
Really?
Yeah, you had that influence on me. I was like, oh, I feel calmer now.
See, it works. It works.
It does. Yeah. I know a couple of another thing was what I mentioned before was just realizing that it was just a thought process and trying to detach from the thought. And I know even now when I sit at my desk and I can feel like there's so much to do, and I can start feeling that anxious feeling. I get up off my chair, and even if I just jump up and down for like 10 times, or I go around the block and get some fresh air, I just try to change something, right? Like I don't try to tolerate the anxiety. I don't try to I just try to interrupt it with something, whether it's breath, up, I'll put some music on sometimes, do a little dance for my for music, whatever, right? Like not everyone can do that if they're back in the office. In your home office, you can always do that. But I get up and I just walk around.
So I know what you're talking about there, because I've done the same thing, and it's about changing your state, isn't it? Really, it's another way of pulling yourself out of a state of being paralyzed from the mind's thoughts and just changing your state. I mean, Tony Robbins, another famous sort of life coach, talks about that, right? If you change your state, you can change. Or I think it's emotion comes from motion, and always, if you can dance around or go for a run or do any kind of exercise, you just instantly feel better. You just instantly feel better because you're in a different state. You're not in a state where you're just trapped and small and listening to thoughts. All of a sudden, you're alive again.
Yeah, absolutely. What else? Anything else that we want to say about anxiety and overwhelm? We've gone through a lot, actually.
Yeah, I know. What else? No, I think, to be honest, I actually think that summarizes it pretty well. It feels like that really we've kind of gone through the motions with it. And I like what you said, really, is that when you're never going to totally eliminate it, so don't try and stress out too much about that, but just focus on taking small steps to notice it, name it, and get present. And practice. Practice. Don't think that just because you haven't been able to deal with anxiety, you can't ever deal with it, in terms of making it a little bit easier. Just put the energy into practice, and it will get easier.
Yeah, it takes time. It does. And it does take a bit of practice and attention over time to kind of start to see some changes. But it does work in the background, and it gets so much easier once you just have these kind of go-to strategies for dealing with it when you become aware of it. So I'd underline everything you just said.
Awesome. Cool.
Well, I guess that's it for this week.
That's it for this week. Another great conversation, Lisa, from Canada. Lisa in Canada, Steve in London. It's been fun, as always.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah, I'll see you next time. See you later.